My name is Annaliese Jacobsson. For those of you who don't know me, I am a social worker and a mental health therapist, and have worked for a couple years in resettlement land with people who've come as refugees. I worked as a case manager for a bit. I worked as a therapist, and I actually recently just moved to Tacoma, where I'm working as a therapist here in a little bit different capacity than I was in Boise, but this work is really, really close to my heart, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. So before we get started, I do just want to let you know that we're not going to be talking about specific traumas or anything today, but I do ask that you take care of yourself if this brings up anything in you. I don't know, what everybody comes to this with, so please take care of yourself in whatever way that looks like today. But my hope is really to give you a background of what is trauma, how does it affect our brain and body system, and then with that knowledge, what can we do as we walk alongside in friendship and volunteering or work capacities with people who've come to the US as refugees, or people who are wherever you are in Manila or wherever you are. So like Marianne said, please, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we'll get to those at the end. We'd love to answer any questions that come up if we can. And I will be giving this PowerPoint presentation. I can email it out if that would be desired. So we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, okay, so trauma. There's a lot of different definitions for trauma actually out there, and I liked this one definition from Dr. van der Kolk, which is the essence of trauma is that it is overwhelming, unbelievable, and unbearable. So trauma essentially is something that is a traumatic incident, is an incident that causes physical, emotional, spiritual, or psychological harm. It's something that threatens our sense of well-being, safety, or a sense of self, or the sense of safety of somebody we deeply care about, because we're connected organisms. So we're going to go using that broad definition of trauma. And I want to talk a little bit about what this does to the brain. So a traumatic incident is different than also traumatic stress. So traumatic stress is the way that our body continues to hold those memories and respond to those memories after that traumatic incident has occurred. And I want to show you this using a brain-hand model from Dr. Dan Siegel. And so we're going to use this just as a way of exploring, and this is something I use with kids too. It's nice and simple if you want to use it again in the future. So we're going to use this part of our hand is going to represent our prefrontal cortex. So that's our smart part, as I like to call it. And this is the part of our brain that does our best thinking, our good problem solving, where we learn math, and how it's in this part of the brain that you're understanding the sounds I'm making with my mouth and having meaning from them. So, and our cortex up here, and this is where the majority of our memories are also stored in like nice chronological order. And then down here represents our brain stem. So that's our instinctive brain, the part of our brain where we don't have to think about our heart beating or blinking or taking a breath when we need to. That part of our brain controls that. And then inside we have our limbic system. So this is the part of our brain, if you look in the picture, the emotional brain. So it's the part of our brain that I'm going to call it today the smoke alarm. So this does so many helpful things for us. It's often the emotional center of the brain. And the smoke alarm piece, what that does is it is protecting us, and it is our alarm for danger. So it's always scanning the world, taking in any sensation and telling us whether we need to respond or not, as if it's danger. Now, this part of our brain is also where our traumatic memories are stored. So the things that were painful, the memories that, the things that hurt us are stored in here in sensations. So they're not stored in like a chronological order. They're stored in what we can smell, see, taste, feel, And so because of that, that has a lot of implications for how our body responds later. I'm going to come to that in just a second. So the way when that smoke alarm detects something, it actually sends off, it flips our lid and sends off that prefrontal cortex so that we function in this part of our brain. We're able to function in instinct. Our brain sends all these hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline, into our body so that our muscles get strong. We get energy, so we're ready to fight or flee first. And if that doesn't work, we're ready to freeze and we're ready to kind of play dead or go numb so that the pain doesn't affect us, our body, in as deep of a way as it could. So this part of our brain is so useful, right? This is made by God and so, so, so good. What can be difficult though is that, remember that smoke alarm is always collecting data. So the more and more data it has, we can be doing this more often for times that even that aren't actually threatening, but we remember and we feel the sense of threat in our body. And so our body does this naturally. It sends us into that mode. And so what can happen is for people with a lot of chronic trauma or complex trauma, we can end up living kind of like this, with our lid not fully on, not fully open either, but it's not fully on, and that cortisol is dripping through our body. And that can cause health issues, that can cause also a lot of emotional distress in us. So I just want you to hold that image in your mind as we continue on, and we're going to refer back to that and use that kind of as our metaphor to talk about what's happening in our brain-body system. All right. Now I think to recognize that the refugee highway is filled with trauma, right? The essence of being a refugee is to have experienced trauma at some portion of the journey. So that can be the reasons people are fleeing. As many of you know, to qualify with the UNHCR as the person who is a refugee, you have to have shown that you were persecuted for one of the 5 reasons. You can feel free to look that up another time. But that initial reason is so traumatizing. The process of fleeing for many can also be very traumatizing. Life in a new location for many people can be very difficult. So the camp setting or a city setting without proper documentation to work or create a livelihood for your family, to go to school, to even have access to basic resources, all of that is so deeply stressful and threatening to the sense of safety, well-being, and choice of the person. Qualifying for resettlement, oftentimes people have to, well, not oftentimes, this is the process, that people have to retell their story over and over and over again. It has to be consistent. People are watching for inaccuracies. And so that process is re-traumatizing. So that's something I really want us to hold today. If one of the key points is that when we ask somebody to retell their trauma story without it being in a safe and therapeutic environment with certain things happening, we actually re-traumatize so that their brain goes through that process again and relives the story. So there's been brain scans and studies that show that the brain responds just as though the trauma was still happening in the present, just from the memory, right? Which is, it's a super helpful part of the brain that's really trying to help us out and trying to help us survive and trying to keep us safe. And that can be so, so, so distressing. So I want us to hold that in us as we walk alongside or are friends with people who have trauma experiences. And then the resettlement stress, of course, and I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. So what does trauma look like? I want to just first say it varies so much. There's been studies that show that the way that trauma presents looks different across cultures. And I have seen that in my own work as well, with certain cultures presenting a lot more with physical ailments and reporting a lot of headaches and body pain, versus some of the things that we talk about maybe in our culture, like nightmares and anxiety. But the essence of all of this is that our brain our psychology, our spirit, and our body are all connected. If you're coming from an American context, a Western context, you have probably felt the separation of brain and body that we like to do in our culture. So as much as possible, I want us to integrate that and recognize that when something traumatic happens to us, it happens to our whole being, right? It affects our mind, body, spirit. So you can look at some of the symptoms, things that might present. Some of the things that I really want to highlight here is anger is also very normal, right? That fight response makes a lot of sense when we think about the lid flipping. Anxiety and hypervigilance also makes a lot of sense. So that feeling that we're not fully safe and that we're always have this low buzz of feeling and wondering if we're safe. And then the difficulty trusting, right? If you can imagine that a close relationship was the source of the trauma for some folks, right? Folks coming as refugees might have trauma from their community, the government, but also from other family members or neighbors. So that trust is broken. And so we have to recognize that trust might be hard to build and it might take longer or look different. Feeling numb and disconnected is also very normal. And if you work with kids, this is often a symptom that people don't see. For teachers, they might see this kid as quiet, but then their grades might suffer, their social activities might suffer. And so this is something to kind of keep an eye on, because we see the anger outburst kids more easily. They take our attention more quickly. So there's so much more that can be said on all of this, but I do have to kind of move quickly. And then sleep disturbances are also so normal. So people are often walking around with so little sleep. So if you can just imagine life like with a newborn all the time kind of sleep, if you're having nightmares or trouble falling asleep from this. So that's something to hold in our hearts as well. For people who come as refugees, these are 4 core stressors that the National Institute for Trauma have kind of categorized things as. We've talked about some of them already, but I really want to highlight acculturation stress right now and recognize that and you can look this up in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, that's right. So you can look this up there, but for people who have children who might not have experienced that original traumatic event, the reason to flee, even children who are born here, whose parents have experienced extensive trauma, they will have some of that stored in their bodies. So there's been a number of studies showing that trauma is passed from generation to generation. And there's different thoughts as to why. Some of that could be genetic, some of that could also be the social learning and the environmental, the ways that the parent's trauma affects the child. But essentially what we know is that the children of people who have complex trauma often have bigger amygdalas. This part of the brain is already more active from the moment they're born. And then there can be other things that happen, right? So for children, they often learn language quicker than parents. Their brains are sponges and absorbing. And with that, they can absorb culture more quickly. And so often the power dynamic in the family switches. So the child suddenly has more power than the parent. And you can imagine how stressful that would be to be a parent in that situation, wanting to teach your children, wanting to grow them up in the way they should go, wanting to instill wisdom in them. And so that's something we can hold, that as much as possible, if we can shift to not use the children as the interpreter, to not use the child as the broker of the family, unless absolutely necessary, and to really focus on the parent as the center of the house, as the center of the power. That can be really important, because they are getting that from many other places. I've seen this so many times. There can be other dynamics with family dynamics shifting. In cultures where traditionally the wife wouldn't work, the wife might be working now. There might be a lot of other things happening, as I'm sure many of you actually know this. So thank you for listening if this is familiar information. But all of this can compound the trauma that's in their body-brain system. I'm not going to go over this too much. This stages of resettlement was something that my previous boss talked a lot about. But what I want to highlight here is that these are normal stages of the process of resettlement. So it's normal to have an experience where there's maybe a lot of joy and so much excitement and relief, and then to go through some disillusionment, depression, and hopefully to move into a place of integration. So some people can get stuck in one of these stages, but just to normalize that the emotions of people as they process being here might feel a little jarring to those of us walking alongside, but they're normal and it's part of the process. Okay, so some of the ways that when somebody's lid is flipped, how can we help them put their lid back on, and how can we help ourselves when our lid gets flipped, right? We all have this system too. And so somebody else's trauma might, or traumatic reaction might also bring up stuff in us, might remind us of our events, might feel stressful or like conflict. Maybe you can use this information too for political conversations in this season right now. But the couple of things I want to highlight here are empathy, choice, and dignity. They're bold for a reason. So one of the biggest ways that our brain-body system is designed is to bring our regulation, bring our lid back on through connection, right? We are born with this. We are meant to attach to mama and dad, right? Like we are meant to have this system inside of us. And so that same system is in us now. And so when we offer empathy, when we make connection, when we're warm and welcoming, that is healing. So thank you for those of you who are walking with people right now. That is healing. In that, the essence of trauma strips choice and strips dignity from the person, right? It is trapping. And so when we do not offer choice, we can re-traumatize people. So as much as possible, we need to remember that the people standing in front of us are whole, independent human beings who can make their own decisions. We can help them navigate what the choices are in front of them. We might know the choices a little bit more intimately if we have been in a culture where they're coming to, but that's our job, is just to offer the choice. It is not to make the choice for them. It is to offer and to honor their dignity and whatever choice they choose to make, no matter the consequences, right? They can make those choices within themselves. And I also want to honor and recognize that resettlement, the process and the way it's designed on a federal governmental regulation level, does not give much choice. It forces people, it says you can't get your money if you don't do these things in this time. And so as much as possible, if on the outside we help people recognize what choices they do have in front of them and honor them, that can be so, so helpful. So relationships. And then the second thing I really want to highlight here is not to bring up triggering conversations, not to ask about the trauma. So instead of saying, oh, why did you come? How did you get here? Those types of questions that go back and ask about what happened in the home country, we can ask them how they're doing in the present. We can ask maybe cultural questions like, oh, tell me about the foods you enjoy, or something like that, that builds connection. But then if the trauma comes up, we don't ask for more, right? It's a gift. When people give you their stories, that is a gift. And you would never ask for more of a gift, right? You'd never ask for more cake unless it's offered to you. So holding that space for people as if it's a gift is so, so helpful. And then movement is always helpful. Anything that moves both sides of our body is super, super helpful. And that's something that you can do for yourself too. Go on a walk after. If you have heard a trauma story, take care of yourself. I stomp after some of my sessions. I shake it off sometimes when something feels really heavy inside of my own body. And then mindfulness, so coming back to our sensations and to the present moment, tells our body that we're safe. One of the easiest ways to do this when you're in community with somebody is to eat, to offer tea, offer coffee, offer a piece of fruit, offer a mint, something to get the sensations of the present back into that person's mind, can begin to help them know, oh, I'm safe in this moment. I'm not back in the trauma. So I think I've already shared this, but essentially that there's a potential for harm or healing in these places, and that can be really heavy to hold. So I just want to honor that there is grace here. And I think many of us who've been doing this work and having these friendships have made mistakes. And there is grace as we ask for forgiveness, as we move forward and we learn more. Now you know more, so now you can do different. But I just love this quote, and I just want to hold this for a second. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. Again, our relationships, I love how the neuroscience is now lining up with what I see in the Bible, and how my theology and all of that, it lines up so beautifully. This is how we are made. So just, I want to note that sometimes that life continues after people arrive, right? People arrive in resettlement, and then things can happen. In Boise, we've had several of our own tragedies, including a stabbing at an apartment complex that affected many, many families, and the fire of the international market, and that affected many businesses of people who come as refugees. So in those moments when we're walking with a friend through current trauma or crisis, some people might be experiencing the election season that way too, that some of those same things apply. And an extra layer of this is that it's okay to ask about the present thing once, right? Make sure that people know that it must be hard, right? We can offer that. We can say, oh, I've heard about this. I just wanted to check in on you and wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you, and I really care about you. And so, and then their response, we just believe them and we hold them wherever they are. Whether they want to talk about it or not, that is their choice. But one of the things that we can do in these moments too is that we can hold a special place for the feeling. So instead of focusing on the events and our own curiosity, we can say, oh, that must have been so scary. Wow, I can really see the pain that you're experiencing. I can just imagine what your body's holding, right? Those simple statements of empathy that says, I see your pain, are so much more helpful for connection than, oh, what does that mean? Or what was that government thing, right? And that's where our minds often go. So instead, coming to the feeling. Actually, I'm going to talk about that in just a sec. This is a slide that I just wanted to pause and recognize that we all come here with our own stuff, and that we also all need our own healing. And so we come to the throne of grace for that, for our help in time of need. And then we go to others in their help of time of need. And sometimes it's at the same time, and that can be hard. Right now, we're in a pandemic where all of us are feeling the effects of this in whatever ways that's happening, whether our kids are maybe doing school at home and that's stressful, or our work has shifted, or someone we know is ill or has died. That is happening while we also might be walking alongside people in tragedy. So recognizing that this can happen at the same time, but that we also need to take care of ourselves. With this, there's so much to say here again. But I think some of the things I want to really note are that taking care of ourselves is not an option in this work if we're going to stick to it. And so one of the ways we can do that is we can set boundaries. We can set boundaries on relationship, not necessarily in a way of like, I will only see you from this time to this time every week. It doesn't have to be firm like that, but we can know in our own minds and hold, what kind of commitment do I want to make, and honor that for ourselves. Because for people who've experienced trauma, it's a lot more helpful to have a boundaried relationship that lasts than to have a super intense relationship with no boundaries where the person burns out and leaves, right? I'm with you every day for 3 weeks and then I disappear. That can be re-traumatizing because it breaks that sense of connection and breaks that sense of trust. And so really thinking about, okay, how do I want to show up, and what can I give, and how can I be with people, and how can I do this as in the long term and hold these relationships as so important. And then recognizing our own brain-body system, talking about this with other people, I think is so helpful. Like what we're doing here, we're connecting with people who share our hearts. And so that can be such an important part of our own healing and our own longevity in this work. So I have talked a lot. Thank you for listening so well to my quick sharing. Before we move to questions, I will take questions in a second. So if you have them, please go ahead and type them in. But I just want to note that you'll get this PowerPoint. But here's some books. And right now, this website, Sanctuary Mental Health, I just want to draw your attention to that as a really helpful resource. They just put out a really good video with Dr. Hillary McBride talking about emotions. So there's so much good stuff on there. It's a Christian organization who's trying to kind of remove the stigma and give mental health resources. So that's a really great place to start if you want a place to go for more. And I would love to take some questions now if we have them. All right. No questions so far?
Yeah, we have one question. Something that really struck me is the re-traumatizing nature of recounting trauma. This is from Monica. One of the areas I see this most is in the efforts to raise awareness, fundraise for organizations. Yeah. What is a better way to do this?
Ooh, that is such a good question. There is so much there. And I think probably there's some fundraisers out there that have better ideas than I do. But I think that the things I really want to point out are that we can focus on the strength, resiliency, and dignity of people before we focus on the poverty, struggle, and difficulty. And I would even want to acknowledge that a lot of what I've just focused on, my whole talk today has really been focused on the issues and the pain. But people have survived so much to get to where they are, right? And so that is just as fundamental as the pain. And so when we focus on that piece, that is way more dignifying, first of all, and more healing. And then secondly, I think the most fundamental thing is we never want to coerce or to have this tied in any way to the feeling of, I'm trying to think of what to say here, but the coercion of any type, even if that's relational, is really what I'm getting at, right? So we want to be really careful how we ask people to participate, and that we give them choice, that this is fully optional. Some people find healing in sharing their stories. That's beautiful. By all means, let's elevate those voices who want to share their stories or who want to educate the community, but that needs to be their choice. And they need to feel inside of them that this is going to be a healing, helpful thing for their journey. I love the Refugee Speaking Bureau for that reason, because it's people who support each other in that process, who go through it together. And so we can elevate voices like that have already chosen this and who are already further along in their healing process, where they know that they can tolerate sharing their story.
Annaliese, I need to let you know that we can go to 10:55 for the workshop time today.
Okay.
We have a question from Jackson. How helpful is a therapy like EMDR to, quote, close the lid and help people not be re-traumatized as easily?
Yeah, so EMDR is very helpful. EMDR, internal family systems, is another really good trauma processing modality that qualified therapists, like people who have training in it, should do. And even then, what I have seen and all of the wisdom that has been given to me from people who's been doing this work for much longer, including Kathy Tidwell and Marla Lipscomb and Tracy Harrod and Kimmy Eames, they all have said, like, those are things that come way later. So when we're even walking in a therapy setting with people who've come as refugees, we focus initially on the relationship. We focus on building safety and trust, right? Remembering that trust was broken, and so that trust has to be reconnected first. And so that takes a long time for some folks. Some folks come, I had one person who came and who had been in therapy in their second country, and so they were so ready, right? It was much quicker. But for most folks that I worked with, even for 2 years, we didn't get to extensive trauma processing. And that was where they were. And so that's one of the challenging things to hold, is that the healing journey doesn't often look like complete recovery right away. But it's finding a new normal. It's finding integration, acceptance, and meaning with the pain, just like grief, right? I mean, I know, Uncle Jackson, I'm talking to the choir here with you with that, but just like grief, we find new meaning and a new way of being in the world that isn't our past one, right? And so we carry that pain inside of us. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but therapy is great as a resource for people. And I would say that if you do feel at some point like somebody is really sharing their story a lot with you, that can be something that you offer them as a choice and help maybe reduce the stigma, as you say, oh, I heard this therapist lady talking at this conference and she said it was really helpful. And I've been in my own therapy because I believe in it, right? And so that's something I also let people know, is like, we all have things to heal from. And this is, I just try to normalize that process and offer it as a resource and an option if people would like it.
Thanks. Annaliese, can you explain a little bit about what EMDR stands for?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization, reprocessing. Thank you. So it is essentially a therapy modality that works to integrate the memory from down here in the senses to up here, where it's stored with our other memories. It's using bilateral movement. So when I talked before about how walking or dancing or using both sides of our body, that is healing. And so we can use the research that they have done with EMDR in our regular life for our own healing, or even with other people. Sometimes we can invite people to go on a walk if their body is able and willing. That can be even a great way to have discussions. I've integrated this into my marriage even. Like, we have way better conflict resolution if we go for a walk and talk about it than if we sit still and everything's trapped inside. And so those are things that, like, yeah, so that's something maybe we can pull from EMDR, but it's a it's a therapy modality that you should only do if trained.
All right, this question is from Monica. Are there special certifications to look for or networks/resources for finding local therapists specially trained to work with forcibly displaced people?
Yes, thank you for that question. I wish that we had some sort of way to really signal what people's training level is, because right now it is the hip thing in therapy to say you're like culturally competent or like have cross-cultural clients, even for people who don't have extensive training in that area. So often it is really hard to navigate. You can ask what their training is specifically with forcibly displaced peoples. There are in Boise area, you can ask them specifically if they've taken the Healing Encounters training, or if they've had like a training specific to forcibly displaced people. And I would encourage that if you're in Boise to look for somebody who has that, because there are opportunities to do that in the Boise area. I don't know what that looks like elsewhere, but I know that therapists in Boise can get that training, and should if they're going to be seeing that population. But other things you can look for are specific trauma certification. So people who have certification, EMDR might be one of them, internal family systems might be another, but some of us just have like a general trauma certificate or have specific training. So that should be noted somewhere on the website or profile. And that's a really good place to start and weed people out. If they say their focus is like families or depression and anxiety and don't mention trauma, then that might be a good one to rule out.
All right, and we have a comment from Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
The people we work with have come around the world to the US border to ask for asylum. They believe in the United States and the Statue of Liberty, but when they arrive, they get put in immigration prisons, and many of them get deported. The disappointment of how they have been treated makes me so sad. Please pray for all the people on our border and in our immigration detention centers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think we all in this moment can just have our spirits echo that prayer, and our hearts break, and we can lament in this moment for those folks. That's a trauma that's happening right now. Yeah, it is truly heartbreaking, and our God sees.
All right, we have just a couple minutes. One thing I didn't mention that Monica had written, she just appreciates this session. She said it's been so great. Jill Kerbo, this has been so helpful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, any other questions that people have, feel free in our last moment. Well, I just want to feel free if you do have one, let me know. But I just want to thank you all for being here, and want to just emphasize again, if we leave with something, that that the ways our bodies are designed, yes, there's the trauma that gets hold, but we're designed for survival and we're designed for connection. We're designed in this beautiful way, and so we get the Holy Spirit in us, and the Holy Spirit goes with us as we are Jesus to people, right? This is the incarnate version, and maybe this is my own stuff that I'm thinking through right now, but feeling and knowing that Jesus came to the world in flesh has just been really on my mind and heart right now, as we get to be in flesh with other people. Right now we're over Zoom with other people, but we get to be what people sense and feel connected to, and that is healing. So thank you for those of you who are friends with people who've experienced trauma, for people who are volunteering or walking alongside in whatever capacity you're doing it. Thank you. That is healing, beautiful work. There are many people who will never step into a therapy office for whatever reason, but the community who walks alongside them can begin that process, and they can still create beautiful, meaningful, healing lives. So Yeah, thank you for all of you, what you do, and for being here, and for your desire to know more. I hope that even in what we hold of what we didn't know and how we might move differently, I hope that mostly you leave with a sense of encouragement and are able to give yourself some compassion, as this is complex, challenging, not straightforward stuff. We live in the gray when we're holding space for people.
Annaliese, can you give us any suggestions for building relationships and trust with new families who have just arrived?
Absolutely, yeah. So I would say one is listen and watch for their boundaries, as we so really hear what they would like, and honor, especially if they have boundaries. And then the second thing is eat. Eat with people, celebrate with people, mourn with people, just the same way we do with anybody here. Learn about culture, right? If you are interested and genuinely interested in who they are as a human, not as a project, not even as somebody to evangelize to, but just generally interested in them as a human, that is going to build trust. People sense that, and there's an abundance of grace in that space where we're trying and we're moving towards trust, right? Just like we have, hopefully, and we're learning this too, grace for each other when we're in relationship. We all hurt each other. That's part of the deal of being human. And when we ask for forgiveness, when we honor that we didn't know, when we say thank you for not only the tea that they maybe put in front of us, but for the stories that they give us. Those are some of the ways that we build that trust. But yeah, I think that there's so much richness there, and I could go on and on about that, but maybe I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Annaliese.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you all.